So just to kick this off, I wanted to thank our COTE committee sponsors, Indoor Weather Professionals, Pilgrim Building Company, and Hill and Wilkinson General Contractors. This is the second of our four-part, maybe longer, 2030 commitment subcommittee series. And we'll be talking about sustainability action plans and goal settings today. And we have two great presenters with us. We have Kristen Dotson from Miller-Hull Partnership. She has lots of credentials that she wouldn't share with me. So, and then we have Kelsey Wotilla with Escu Dumez Ripple. And we'll kind of set this up as we'll do kind of 20-minute, 25-minute presentations each, and then we'll have the remaining time to kind of have more of a chat and have people who are joining us be able to ask some questions if anything comes up, and if not, then the three of us will just have a good old little chat about how our experience has been. So with that, I will kick it over to Kristen, and she can kind of talk about the Sustainable Action Plan and that process at Miller-Hull.
All right, make sure I unmute myself here. All right, so looks like I am successfully screen sharing. All right, so I'm just really going to kind of tell you the story of my involvement with Miller-Hull Sustainability Action Plan. Miller-Hull's been around for 40, how old am I? We're the same age. Miller-Hull and I started in the same year. So I clearly haven't been involved with them all of that time. There was a long history before I got there. But when I came onto the scene as Sustainability Services Director, what you see on your screen was our Sustainability Action Plan. This was the plan that had been written and submitted to AIA 2030. You can access it through the DDX. So if you go in here and you click on DDX, and then you have to apparently go to this, what looks like a help sticker, and navigate your way to these plans. You can find kind of everybody's plans on there, but, oh, how do I hide this? There we go. Nope. I want to hide the meeting controls. There we go. So once you get to this plan, you can scroll through it. It's still up there in perpetuity. AIA doesn't actually let you update your plan on the website, unfortunately. And it's terrible, quite honestly. It's not that the content is terrible, it's just that it's not a plan. It's a bunch of collection of stuff that Miller-Hull was doing, which is all well and good. You know, it's good to know that we were doing things. But unfortunately, it just wasn't a plan. There was nothing to follow. You know, it's kind of like, here's what we've done in a bunch of projects, and it was an agglomeration of all of that, but it wasn't a path forward. So what I came along and did was basically told my leadership that, and I said, hey guys, it's not great. And they said, cool, rewrite it. I was like, okay. So that's what I did, essentially, with some help. So if you go to our website, millerhull.com, it's a little buried in the About Sustainability section. We try to post as much of our stuff online as possible. And the reason for that is that we know all of this takes a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of time, and not everybody has that kind of time. And we're all headed toward the same goals. We all want to, you know, do our part to build intelligently and sensitively. And so if we share resources, we can all do that a lot faster and a lot more successfully. So if you go in there, you can pull up our Sustainability Action Plan, our latest and greatest. And we've went through several iterations. I think this is like version 3 or 4 at this point of this one, not even of the old one. And the way that we structured this was to really say, kind of, we do a lot of living building projects. And I think the reason for that is really values alignment. We really like the philosophy that you try to do the right thing or the best thing, even if it's not quite possible today. So, and this isn't a structure I came up with at all, but we always look at like living buildings as sort of saying, where should we be, versus LEED, which is saying, what more can we do right now? And so they're kind of both have a great place in the market. but we've sort of view living building as pulling us forward and LEED kind of pushing us forward, and both are great. But we definitely defaulted to that idea of like, what's the most beautiful, perfect, amazing future we can imagine, and then build the steps to get there, rather than thinking about our goals as what can we do today. We're like, we can backfill that. Like, what are we headed toward? What's the ultimate goal we want to head toward? So we broke it into design work and operations. You want to cover sort of both of those within your plan. We do have additional sections around like staff education and other stuff that we still haven't fleshed out yet. So this is still a work in progress. But this is kind of where we got to. And you can see our goals, pretty straightforward. We want every project to meet, to be a regenerative design by 2030. Of course, we have to then define what that means. And that's kind of where you get into these objectives and then strategies underneath. So our objective is, you know, to target net positive energy on every project, target carbon sequestration, net positive water, all of these things. So you can see it's kind of like, we couldn't imagine something better than net positive water. We couldn't imagine something better than net positive energy. So that's our end goal. When we encounter something that's better than that, we'll update this and make that goal even bigger. But I think the critical thing for us with this plan was, how do we get there? What are the strategies? And that's what I think is really important about this document. And then another one I'm going to show you. A lot of plans that you'll see all over the internet, all different kind of companies, not just architecture firms, you'll see the goals and you'll see probably these objectives. And then you might get a readout of how close the company is getting to those. So they might have, say, like a zero waste objective, and they'll say, oh, for the last 3 years, we've managed to divert 68% of our waste from landfills. That's great. That's all good information. At no point did they tell you how they did that. At no point did they give you a roadmap that you also can follow. And that's what we wanted to break with this. We wanted to lay out all of the steps and all of the things that we wanted to try to do to achieve these goals, and then make them transparent so anybody else could pick up that roadmap and either follow it if it works for you, or adapt it, you know, say, well, this doesn't really apply to us, but what else could we do here? And the reason for that is just shortcut the effort. We wanted to shortcut the effort for all of you, all of our peers, trying to do this stuff too. And in the same way, like, we'd love to poach from you too. When you have great stuff that we can just jump on board, we'd love to do that as well. So getting into the details of this, I'll just pick one. What's a good one here? I don't know. Any of these are fine. But you can sort of see, like, design to meet the LBC materials pedal. We felt that was a really shorthand way to sort of say, are we touching everything that has to do with materials? And then you see the specifics about red list compliance, FSC certified wood, ingredient disclosure, to build transparency, recycled content, local sourcing, and then partnering with our GCs around waste. So we really tried to focus this not on the whole life cycle of a project, but really what was within our control as architects in the design stage. We have other places within this plan that we get into things like post-occupancy evaluation and some other things that are sort of outside-ish the realm of design, but still inform it. But we really wanted to focus on what can we as architects do to move the project toward regenerative design. And so the other document I want to show you is also on our webpage. And we are completely redesigning our website. So my apologies that it's kind of a mess, and it will be. But if you scroll down under this sustainability action plan, this link will take you to the document I just took you to. But there's also this wheel, which is impossible to read unless you click on it and zoom in. And this is the map that I really think is helpful and that other people are not doing. And I wish they would, because I think we'd all benefit from it. This wheel has all the information you just saw. So it has the goal of regenerative design, and then the objective, say like target net positive energy. But then it gets the strategies here that you saw, but then it has 2 additional levels of information that weren't on that plan. And those levels of information are trying to break it down even further into more steps. So I think a really good example, I'm trying to read my own wheel here. And of course we get in the graphic design and all that of your graphics people, and that's always fun. But let's see. All right. So let's talk about the materials one just as an example. Design to meet LBC. We want to vet all specified products for the most current version of the LBC red list, right? That's a pretty lofty goal for every project, especially projects that are not going for a Living Building Challenge certification. So we tried to break it down into even more detail about how we were actually going to do that. So you can see, maybe you can see here on my screen, step one was to remove 6 chemicals from our standard specs starting in 2017. So this plan really launched in 2017. So that was like the first thing we were going to do, was just take our standard specs, purge them we're just going to pick 6 chemicals, the ones that we felt were kind of the first ones to tackle for whatever reasons. And your definition of the first to tackle will be different from ours, and that's okay. And once we sort of purge that from our standard specs and kind of our standard materials, keep adding chemicals or chemical classes every year until we got to the full red list on every project. There's also, content here like partner with our sub-consultants to remove these red list chemicals from their projects, from our projects as well, but through their specs. So it's not just the architectural specs, it's also the MEP specs. And then another step was, how are we going to do this? So really saying like, okay, we want to remove the chemicals. We want to talk to our partners about it. What are the tools we need to actually make that happen? And we built that into our plans. So you see like that was have case studies demonstrating the why and why it's good for you. Because it's not enough to just say, we're going to do this. You actually have to bring a lot of people on board to make it actually happen. So we could purge our specs. We had to get our spec writer involved to do that. But then we had to educate our staff on what we were doing so they didn't completely undo that work, and they were keeping an eye on it for anything that might pop up, especially for non-standard materials. So we had to educate them quickly without making them material science experts. We also had to give them the tools to talk to the client and to talk to the general contractor, because again, it's a group effort. Just because you put it in the specs doesn't mean it's going to happen. So that's where our case studies really came in. And that's another thing we put on our website that I want to share with you is we built these case studies. This one's about to be updated any day. We actually have a version 3 now, because as I said, we're adding new chemical classes every year to this document. So it will be updating constantly. But this is what we generated at the time when we were just targeting these chemicals. And it was just a quick 2-pager, right? And it was meant to be like, here's what you need to know. So we're trying to get rid of PVC. What is it? Why is it a chemical of concern, essentially here? And then we really want to focus on, like, as architects, this is why you should care. As a building owner, this is why you should care. And as a contractor, this is why you should care. And then ending with substitutions, right? It's not enough to say, don't do this. You also need to give people what they should be doing instead, or give them options so that they're not having to go down the deep rabbit hole of researching every one of these. And that's it. That's what we did for, each of these chemicals was just a quick 2-pager. We made it public so anyone could use it. And we use it all the time. It's been amazingly effective helping our clients understand why we're doing this. We've actually heard stories about our peers, competitors in the marketplace, using this with their projects and getting client buy-in, which we think is fantastic. We love that. We've also had clients come to us with this and say, hey, we saw this, you guys did this. So, what does it mean? And so that's been really great. So that's just one thread of how we're really trying to use our sustainability action plan to be as clear of a step process as possible, and really thinking through the entire chain of how do we actually make it happen? Not just say we're going to do this, but really spell out the steps, how we think it's going to happen. And the reason for doing that in the plan, in that green circle you saw, is that makes it possible for us to put this in front of a bunch of stakeholder groups to be like, is that reasonable? What else do you see? So we put this wheel in front of our staff and we're like, project design staff, like, are these things doable? Like, what are we missing? Which of these things is just not in your control? So we could, by spelling it out this way, we could really make it as robust and actionable as possible. Yeah, and then you can see on the very outside of the wheel, that's how we defined that we'd met that goal. So if the goal was incorporating water reuse strategies, that was the strategy. If all potable water is reused at least once, we felt like that was the good metric. That was the good benchmark to say we have incorporated water reuse. That's how we defined that end goal. So that is it. That's kind of the story of Miller Hull's Sustainability Action Plan in a nutshell. And I'm happy to answer questions. I guess the one thing I didn't talk about so much. So that was the regenerative design. We also talked about what we called ensure design thinking supports our core values. So that's where we got into things about, addressing the social and environmental justice impacts of our work. Some of the things that are a bit more about how we work, not necessarily the design interventions of the projects, but do directly impact design. So again, this is just the design work wheel. We have a separate one for our sort of internal office operations. But the office operations wheel is not on the website because we haven't fleshed it out yet, but it is part of that larger goal objective plan of the PDF. So it's all in progress and it's all changing. And that's, to me, that's how it should be. Plans should never be static.
Well, thank you, Kristen. That was super informative, and my head's exploding a little bit with just the amount of information you just gave us. And well, I know I have some questions about process a little bit, and we'll kind of get to that after Kelsey gives us kind of her presentation on goal setting, just so we kind of have all the information together, and then we can kind of go ahead and ask our questions. So Kelsey, why don't you take us away?
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Kristen. That wheel itself is like such a dense record of knowledge that you guys have created. I haven't seen that before, so I know I'll start bringing it to our office and using it. So I think what Kristen just presented with their sustainability action plan, I'm going to kind of teeter on zooming in and out of the level of detail that you just talked about. And as it relates to the 2030 challenge and why we set targets and standards internally to kind of do better as architects. So true to the kind of zooming out idea, here's a satellite image of South Louisiana. I really like this because as architects, we're interacting with the environment, you know, depending on what you want to define as nature or not. It's pretty clear to see what is the built area of this image. And so that's New Orleans, which is where SQ Dumez Ripple is based. And the thing about building that I think relates to all of us as designers is this word Anthropocene. Hopefully you've seen it. It was a couple years ago, I guess, that we entered into it. It's the current geologic age, and it's defined by the fact that human activity has the dominant influence on the climate and environment right now. And specifically to me, this really resonates as an architect that we are actively influencing the environment, whether it's built or natural. And in doing so, we're affecting climate and environment and climate change. So to me, that quickly becomes a call to action. So we know we're doing this, what can we do about it? So just another pretty image showing you a little bit of the New Orleans skyscraper, and that arrow is where I would be if I were working in my office. Instead, obviously, work from home. And so I want to talk about what EDR is doing as our call to action and kind of our values and ethos of doing better. So we're a firm of about 50 people, founded in 1989, and with a virtue set of sustainable buildings. We've got a large amount of our staff that's LEED accredited, and we support people taking their tests and educating themselves and getting that credential. And in 2014, we won the AIA National Firm Award. What's missing on this slide is two things that happened before that. In 2009, we became a signatory for the 2030 challenge. And in 2012, we wrote our sustainability action plan. So that lagged behind a little bit from being a signatory to when we got to actually having our plan, which is also due for an update. But those are kind of some benchmark timeline targets that help define and guide us just overall as a blanket statement as the firm. So 2012, I mentioned, is when we developed our sustainability action plan. And that was a result of that year's research fellowship. We're a firm that is dedicated to research in design and form and function together. So this research fellowship is kind of a cornerstone of allowing that to be a reality in our office. And that was founded in 2012. The topic of the research fellowship changes every year, kind of based on what's happening in architecture, what might be relevant to a project that we have in the office at the time that we really need that deep level of knowledge and understanding. So we dedicate 1 or 2 people to be able to kind of do that vertical part of the T level of knowledge, research, and then spread it to the horizontal end, spread it throughout the firm, and get everybody, you know, fluent in whatever these topics are. So 2012 building performance, one of the results was our sustainability action plan. 2019, pointing to myself, aligned at the topic was path to carbon zero. And that was, as hopefully you all recall, aligned with the call to action by the AIA that there's no more business as usual, because we passed the resolution on urgent climate action. So what does all that mean? Great, a bunch of kind of words saying let's change stuff, but as Kristen said, if we don't have things to point to, if we don't have touchstones, we're not actually going to do it. So the goals that we target are on building operations and building materials. Obviously, those are the things that we have influence over as architects. We can design an efficient building and we can choose what materials go into it. And as hopefully you all know from your first session or from prior knowledge, we're responsible with the built environment sector for 40% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. So first I'm going to talk about our focus on materials and energy, on energy specifically, what we're doing at EDR to design a more efficient building. We continue to check in and align ourselves with the 2030 commitment goals and targets, which are supported by the top 10 framework for design excellence. And I wanted to highlight within that framework, which is being updated, that two of these principles focus on carbon emissions from design for energy and design for resources. So again, just kind of highlighting, these are the things we're thinking about and measuring in the targets and what I'll be talking about. So part of setting a metric, setting a goal of what we want to design for comes through in our green charrette, which does not always happen at the very beginning of every single project. And the charrette is both thinking about what are the things we're up against in this project and setting our goals. And this is really important to do early on because it provides us that touchstone that's pinned up at every presentation that we can say, hey, are we doing this? We came up with this at the project kickoff meeting. Are we meeting this goal of energy reduction? Are we meeting this goal of healthy materials? And it just helps keep it top of mind and holds you accountable throughout the entire process. And really importantly, I think as well, it builds a consensus throughout all levels of the project team, whether you're drafting the building, whether you're a project manager, and it gives you a deliverable that you can talk about with consultants of what your performance goals are and energy and material targets are. So this really simple step of just having something written down to hold you accountable, to hold your project team accountable, is one of those things that I think is pushing us forward, that we're marking our progress as we go. And one of the most simple things that came out of both the 2030 challenge, being a signatory, and kind of our green charrette, was what's a simple checklist thing that everybody can do to make and design a better, more efficient building. So Louisiana is on 2007 energy code, and the 2030 targets are based off of a national survey of existing buildings from 2003. And in order to give us an energy reduction target, we use this internal standard of let's design better than the Louisiana state required mandate for energy code, and let's use 2016 as our baseline for design. And that, as a kind of rule of thumb, should get us a 50% more efficient building than the baseline survey. So it doesn't quite reach the 2030 target of 70% reduction, but it's an achievable target for us that we can get on every project and get buy-in from the client, that we're going above and beyond the energy code as required to something that we can meet. So these are just some statistics of how this went for us in 2019 with our reduction target aligned with 2030, and which is the 70% reduction. And as we measured all of our buildings, where we ended up with our predicted EY, we ranged in our target below and above to 30% to our first net zero building, so 100% reduction of energy use. And setting these goals allows us to measure them and check ourselves year by year of if we're meeting them and if we're growing and learning from them. So this graph on the left here shows 2013 to 2018, how we compared against the national firms with energy savings. And as you can see, there's a significant leap in 2016 and beyond with where we are meeting our energy savings. And that was because we were forced is not quite the right word, but because we had this more aggressive target. The dashed red line was the 2030 target up until 2016. And then once you set another higher reaching goal, we had to step up to the plate too. So we went from ranging in the 35% energy savings range to closer to 60%. Again, not quite to the 2030 target, but we still set the goal and raised our bar so that we did better. Kind of looking at the same thing here, tracking what the reduction goals were over time and how we meet them. Again, how it aligns with kind of some landmark times for us with our sustainability action plan and our first net zero energy project. So having these milestones and goals pushes us year by year, and we can see, because we're tracking all of our energy use, that we're improving over time. So here's an example of a project that went through the whole process. It's under construction now. It's a new office center being built in Charlottesville, Virginia. And this project early on set the goal of pursuing a LEED certification and being a high performance kind of building for energy use in that realm. So we set our goal to get an EUI aligned with the 2030 target. So 70% reduction from the standard office building today. And we landed on it because we continued to check back on ourselves. Are we meeting our energy goal? So as we went through massing and as we got into facade design and detail, we were able to check where our energy use was coming from and minimize it. So as we detailed the facade and found our window wall ratio, we found that self-shading was really important. So we played with how much the window needed to be inset to regulate and minimize solar heat gain and achieve our energy targets. So this happened iteratively from schematic design, from massing to all the way, like I said, to facade design in CDs. So without having that target, without having that touchstone, we wouldn't have let this design progress with us as it did. Aligned with the 2030 challenge and the 2016 energy target to design to is now kind of a step up from that we're looking to design to zero code standards. And this is just a quick bar graph showing baseline to design, and this 55% is that number from designing to ASHRAE 2016, which is what the zero code version 1 recommended you design to. They've since updated and want you to design to ASHRAE 2019. But just simply adopting that design to zero code, the first step of what energy performance code you're going to design to, you can realize a 55% savings in energy use. And then the second step is to offset the rest of your energy use. So this image here is a spoiler of our first net zero energy project and all the solar installed on the roof. And the other thing to mention in offsetting the rest is the opportunity for RECs. So you can buy renewable energy certificates and fund green infrastructure options. If your project maybe doesn't have the roof area, there's still options to get to net zero, which is kind of that green dash line showing you design an efficient building and then you offset it through clean energy use. This is a rendering of that project, our first net zero energy project here in Louisiana. It's a multifamily housing where we emphasized that first step, like I said, of getting a low energy use. We're predicted
Looks like we may have lost her. Well, while we wait for her to get a connection again, we could, this is the fun of Zoom meetings, isn't it? I guess we could go on to some questions in the meantime on kind of sustainability action plans. Yeah, we lost her. So I guess in kind of framing the sustainable action plan, so becoming a 2030 signatory requires that you upload a sustainable action plan within the first 3 months. So that's part of the reason why we're kind of having this discussion, is just to kind of give everyone some tools to be able to do that. And how big is Miller Hole?
We're currently 92, split between our Seattle office and our San Diego office. So our San Diego office is about 15, and then everyone else is up in Seattle. And
kind of, and seeing the work that y'all have kind of put in and the thoughtfulness into that plan, it's quite impressive.
Thank you.
And there are some smaller firms here in Austin that probably don't have the amount of resources to kind of put into kind of developing a plan that thorough. So I guess my first question would be like, what are kind of some areas that you would kind of steer some smaller firms into looking into that are kind of manageable with less resources?
Yeah, I mean, so despite it being incredibly challenging to find on the DDX, start with other firms' sustainability action plans. That's why they're up there, right? Is to shortcut the effort. That's, you know, what we looked at as well. And I think that's part of the reason our first one was so bad, is because we didn't have examples to reference. You know, we were just sort of making it up back in 2011, and there weren't a lot of examples out there, especially for architecture firms. Like, sustainability action plans haven't actually been around that long in the industry, in the marketplace at all. And where I saw them originally coming from was big corporations, like, you know, Forbes, Fortune 500s type corporations that were really just doing CSR reporting, which is not the same thing as an action plan. And so to everybody who's starting on this journey, I say, don't reinvent the wheel. That work's been done for you. Like, Frankenstein together what works for your firm based on what's already freely available all over the internet. And that's part of the reason we made our plan available to anybody. Take it, please take it. Cross out all the stuff that doesn't work for you in your firm. Edit the stuff that doesn't work. You know, we wanted to give everybody a leg up so that you could take advantage of the resources we've already spent. It just makes all of us better. And I know sometimes people don't believe me, right? Because we are all competing for the same clients sometimes. But the truth of the matter is, so much of what we're trying to do in the sustainability space, we can't do alone. And it is infinitely easier if there's more of us in the industry asking for it. Transparency in material ingredients is a great, is the classic example. I can't get certain building products that don't have red list chemicals in them because there's not enough demand for them. But if all of us suddenly start asking for it, then the manufacturers start making it, and then it's suddenly easier for me to do that too. So it behooves me to share those resources, because it does come back and serves me as well. And I think sort of flipping from that kind of capitalist me first dogma to a capitalist, raise all boats kind of theory does help all of us. So shortcut it, read through all of, maybe not all, but if you have the time, go for it. But read through those sustainability action plans on the DDX. Start copying and pasting all the things that you're like, yeah, that applies to us. That doesn't, do that. No one's expecting you to write this thing from scratch from inside your brain. And anybody that is just, I don't know, really selfish, I guess. That's kind of my thinking on it, because I don't know. There's not a person working in the sustainability space today that invented anything new. So if they try to claim that, they're liars. We're
That's
all
kind of
working on the
how,
shoulders of somebody previous to us.
that's kind of how our process at the firm I'm at went, is that I kind of just looked at all those examples and started thinking like, oh, how does this apply to what we're doing? And I know kind of in us talking, you said that you kind of just developed that in your basement. And even though you don't have a basement, but that it can be someone, kind of an individual who kind of puts that together, or you like, depending on how your office works. Like we did a survey where we kind of asked everyone like, hey, what is your interest? How can we align this to the interest of everyone in the firm? And because we're Zoom times, that was all digital. But if your firm's a little more collaborative and kind of face to face or webcam to webcam, you can also do like a workshop where you're getting more input from people. It just kind of, I think the process reflects how your firm is kind of structured and what the culture is.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I think that is the most critical piece to making your sustainability action plan actually actionable. It has to be aligned to your culture. And that, I would caution folks to not be so committed to the culture you want that you ignore the culture you have. For Miller Hull, our process, I've never seen it in my life anywhere else I've worked. It was so unique as to like just completely knock me off, my expectations. Essentially, like I said, they said, oh, you don't like it? Great, rewrite it. So I basically, like you said, Josh, went in my basement and did that, and then put it in front of some of my peers, both inside and outside Miller Hull, just be like, am I shooting high enough? What am I missing? How do we spell this out? And got great feedback from that. And at the point we were proud of it and thought it was good, brought it to one of our partners. We have 7 partners that actually are the top decision makers of the firm, and fully expecting them to shoot a bunch of it down, right? Fully expecting them to be like, oh, we can't do that. That's too lofty. That's too lofty. Well, first of all, the first step was I was like, when are they going to meet and talk about this? And they never did, because their philosophy is one partner speaks for all of us. So I didn't have to get the buy-in of all 7 partners. I just had to get one. And they have the trust within themselves to speak for all the rest. So that was really helpful. But I still didn't believe it. Like, it really took me a long time to accept that. I was like, no, they all have, we would be committing the firm to doing these things. That's a big deal. And they're like, yeah, we got it. And I'm like, okay. And then waiting for them to tear it apart and be like, this is too lofty. We can't do this. That's, we're going to lose profit. We're going to lose clients, whatever it was. And they never did. They basically liked that. And they're like, cool. All right, tell us how to get there. And I was like, oh crap. No one's ever asked me that part. I've always had to fight the fight to even get people to commit to the goal, much less tell them how to reach the goal. And that's how we got to that green wheel, was actually having to sit down and be like, okay, how do we get there? What are the things we can actually do to move us toward that goal? So it was a completely different challenge than, I worked with, like I said, Fortune 500 companies and other entities out there. And that was not the case at all. So that was a big shock to me in dealing with my own culture. But that doesn't mean we didn't have to kind of work with staff on buy-in. So we didn't have to work with staff to develop this, because everyone was sort of bought in ideologically to the end goal. And they're like, great, if that's how we get there, cool, we trust you, looks good to us. But then it was like, how do we help everyone on the ground every day making these decisions do this? And that is a constant work in progress. But you might have a firm that's very top down. So you might have to convince your leadership that doing this is even a good idea. So you're gonna have to take a completely different tack based on who your people are. And sometimes a grassroots sort of collaborative brainstorm is the right method. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just gotta get that one person to say yes. So don't waste your time getting, buy-in from everybody if you just have to convince the one person. And don't try to convince the one person if you really need to just convince the grassroots. So just being very strategic about who really has to buy into this to make it a real thing and not just a piece of paper you stick on the website that never gets looked at again.
Well, Kelsey's back, hopefully for the remainder of the session. You had power outage.
Yeah, which is why I wouldn't have had that problem if I had batteries and solar on my house, but I don't. So I guess that's my message to you all. Take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because have I implemented all of it? Maybe not. But Kristen, I was just hearing you say grassroots versus convincing one person. And I just want to add to that, obviously we need firms to buy in. We need mass from, mass membership to be working toward this for real scalable change. But I think no matter what, there's always a bit of a grassroots aspect of it. Like, you all are here choosing to educate yourselves on this. You all are here because you're interested, and hopefully we'll continue to kind of spread this and share with others what you've learned. But you always have the choice to do more. Whether your firm supports it or not, you always can be that catalyst. So I think that's just important too in kind of remembering and how you choose to strategize. Like, don't devalue your role in it as an individual, which is actually perfect, because that's what I'm about to get into, is the scale of impact once we shift from operations to materials. So hopefully what you gathered was we have this internal standard of designing to ASHRAE 2016, which is far better than 2007, which also is far better than the baseline that 2030 measures us from for a % energy reduction improvement. The piece that we're all starting to understand better is embodied carbon. Architecture 2030 has goals for reduction of that as well. What the baseline is set from is a little unclear. I would recommend using the Carbon Leadership Forum calculator that has a survey of over 1,000 buildings nationally, and you can sort by project type or structural component. So that's what we use internally as our baseline to measure our embodied carbon against. But we, in 2019, for the first time, took a small but still a portfolio sample of all our projects, not all our projects, but a representative sample of project types. So new construction, major renovation, and different use types, from office and classroom to multifamily, to museums and more academic settings. So in looking at this, we ran all of these projects through Tally. Some were in different design phases, and that's another thing, kind of tying back to the green charrette, that this shouldn't be a one-time check to set a goal. It's set a goal, set the target, check yourself, measure it, loop back, and report and continue. So it never stops. It's iterative, just like the rest of design. So these projects have a sample from where they were in phase and development. Some were built, some were in DD, some were in CD. But we took a look at structure, envelope, and interior, which influence embodied carbon kind of by weight of building is kind of the best rule of thumb to think about it. So structure is your high impact item to focus on. And as I was saying, scale of impact, this is from a study we did for a client when we were targeting a low concrete mix design. As we probably know, concrete is high emitter of carbon. So we were trying to look at buy-in for carbon offsets for what we couldn't get through a low carbon concrete mix design, but also getting a buy-in to do a better mix design. So this project, which was 200,000 square feet, just without influencing, without changing, without targeting the structure, was going to emit about 6,000 tons of carbon. So putting that in scale, it's an average that 2003 energy use intensity was going to emit 1,600 tons of carbon per year just in being turned on. This high performing or code compliant was going to be about half that. And then high performing, better energy use is about half that again. And then again, for context, 16 tons is the average American a year. So thinking of the scale we have as architects to what we're actually influencing as we choose to build, when we design structure, when we work with our engineers, we have an impact of 400 times ourselves. So that's really exciting. It's a big problem, but it's also one that we actually have control and power over and can have these discussions about. And so that, again, just emphasizes why we need to look at embodied carbon, not just energy use of buildings. Hopefully this is kind of review for everybody: concrete, steel, and wood, from embodied carbon intensity by structural system. Concrete and steel are the highest emitters, and wood tends to be quite a bit lower. So I want to talk about our project, the Thaden School, which is in Arkansas, and built out of wood. The client came to us with an overall campus goal of healthy buildings for healthy individuals. You know, they're teaching the next generation and hopefully trying to facilitate a better next generation than myself or you all. And beyond that, it was kind of up to the project team and working with the client of what that meant. So we definitely targeted low energy use, and we also wanted to choose healthy materials and low embodied carbon, which led us to a wood structure. But instead of going mass timber, the team worked with a structural engineer and a truss manufacturer to make a rigid frame structure out of 2x lumber. So it was kind of built around the design constraint of what could be built by a truss manufacturer with standard nominal lumber and what could fit on a flatbed truck. And all at once doing that to allow us the 70-foot span in this cafeteria kind of community area. So while we're trying to design with a lower embodied carbon material, we still had a lot of design work and creativity that went into it. But if we hadn't even had the conversation of what is a healthy building, what does that mean for the materials we're building with, we probably wouldn't have had this level of innovation and collaboration with the team that still gave us a wood aesthetic. We used a common material and worked together with, sorry, my puppy is not enjoying the rain. I got a little distracted there. And working together with our teams to figure out how to construct this thing that aligned with our targets. So it's good to set goals, and it's important to communicate them with everybody, because everybody needs to come to the plate. Like Kristen said earlier with the Sustainability Action Plan, just because you wrote something into your spec doesn't mean it's going to happen. You need to talk to the person who's actually going to construct the thing and make sure it's feasible and make sure that it can get installed on site. So part of having a green charrette is having that written process to then communicate to your whole design team. So this is just an image I love. We talk about mass timber a lot. You know, it's kind of a buzzword in architecture right now, and just the beauty of wood, I think most architects are pretty drawn to. This project under construction, and just the lightness and air to it that is the opposite of mass timber, I think is really beautiful and exciting. And so that's kind of the final image of this project I like to show of choosing a low embodied carbon material, but still designing smart with it and not treating it like a dumb slab panel. That, you know, there's still a lot of flexibility and options we have. And I think that's what draws us to the table as designers, is not having something totally prescriptive given to us, having these goals, and then using our creativity to still design and make it project specific and unique. So on the other hand, when we do have something handed to us, that's this 80% reduction in embodied carbon, which is pretty standard for a renovation where you're not undergoing major structural changes, is an example of a renovation we did of a existing office building, and saved embodied carbon by reusing the structure, but also in upgrading the MEP system, had a huge EUI reduction from an EUI of about 100 down to an EUI of about 30. So there's just, we have all these targets, and it changes per project what we get to do. But those two touchstones of minimizing your embodied carbon and keeping your energy use intensity target low, and designing a more efficient energy use building can happen across all project types. This gets into those first, the shift that I had talking about materials. When we measured those, that's now something we're starting to do is measure the embodied carbon and report the embodied carbon across more of our projects and see where we end up. So this is just the overall kind of analysis of where we landed with that. And it's kind of the, it's one point in time of the graph you've probably seen from 2030 that shows why upfront carbon, embodied carbon is so important. Annual emissions with a building that meets our energy standard is significantly less than the upfront emissions, that go into building a new building. And that's for new construction. For major renovation, we found that they end up being about the same, what you're putting in versus what is being emitted once you upgrade your mechanical systems. And just that comparison of measuring and understanding where embodied carbon and operational carbon come together. But that also loops back to the goal of the 2030 commitment, that you're measuring and reporting these things. And without doing that, you don't have a check on if you're meeting your goals that you've set and how you're improving over time. So that's really important for both energy and embodied carbon. So like I said, we know what to do, focus on materials and energy. And then, as it sounded like was happening out of discussion, well, I had some technical errors. And like I kind of tried to speak to, take the power on yourself and the opportunity yourself to, excuse my pun here, to infect others. This really stuck with me. I was talking with a friend of mine who's actually out of Austin from Positive Energy. And this was at the beginning of pandemic last year, talking about when the science came out about coronavirus and kind of starting to understand better this thing that has affected the nation and the world globally with how we operate and everything in between. This particle, a COVID molecule, is in relation to a person is 10 million times smaller than a person. And a person in relation to the world is 10 million times smaller than the world. So that's, again, kind of like that chart of an individual impact versus building impact. If you think that you're too small to make a difference, look at what this terrible disease has done to influence the world and realize you're that same scale to influence the world as well. So that's maybe not totally PC, but for me was really a big driver as another call to action to kind of influence this world that we're building and a part of. So that's what I've got for you guys. Thanks for bearing with me through technology issues.
Thanks, Kelsey. Well, if anyone has any questions to kind of start with, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I have a question for both of you, I guess. How are you guys goal setting or coming up with a baseline for your projects in relation to embodied carbon, and how are you tracking with all your projects?
So I can start with that. For our goal setting, there's twofold. One is we use the Carbon Leadership Forum and DQO database, which we can drop a link to in the chat, that has a survey of 1,000 buildings and the embodied carbon associated with it that came out of a partnership with University of Washington, I'm pretty sure. So that's what we use as our baseline for project type or structural type. And then how we measure against that is running projects through Tally. We have also looked at just kind of rules of thumb of structural type and choosing, if we're looking at an office building and we want to meet a reduction, well, was that office building probably built out of concrete or steel? Basic rule of thumb, see if we can design this thing out of wood, see if we can design a more optimized structure to meet a target. And 2030, Architecture 2030 provides you the % reductions that you should be aiming toward for embodied carbon.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a probably more controversial answer. Yes, absolutely using the Carbon Leadership Forum if you need to benchmark things. We actually have some issues with that study because it is only 1,000 buildings. And the data on embodied carbon is just still so, there's so much data still missing. But if you look at the CBEX database, which is the baseline for the 2030 commitment on the operational emissions side, that wasn't a huge database of buildings either. And we've been using that for, well over a decade. So I think it's less, benchmarking is fantastic and it's great because you need to show progress because people want to see that you're making progress. But I feel like too often we're equating the percent reduction with the end goal. Reducing by 20% or 30%, that's not the goal. The goal is carbon zero. The goal is carbon sequestering buildings. We have too much carbon in the atmosphere. We got to pull it out. How can we as architects contribute to that? Building with wood is a potential way to do that, but that's fraught too. I mean, the science of it's very complex and it has to get into sustainable forestry. And, Kelsey and I are on multiple panels talking about this all the time and working groups, trying to get through that. And so I think it's less about what you use to benchmark, pick or baseline, pick whatever you want. Fundamentally, it's who you're talking to and how you make the change to do better. And in the case of embodied carbon, it means less embodied carbon. Does it matter if it's 5% less or 50% less? Not really. It's one building. Just do less and do less at scale. So we do the same similar process to EDR, running everything through Tally. We're actually using our own projects as our benchmark and our baseline, because if you guys have worked in this space at all, you will get very different results from Tally than you do from Athena, than you do from SEMAPro, than you do from OneClick. So just the software you use is going to give you different information. So being consistent, having a volume of projects, understanding what your standard assemblies are, right? We like to pretend that we would design everything from scratch every time, but we don't, right? We have our standard assemblies that we like to use over and over again. That's great. Run the analysis on those assemblies. So you can at least say, oh, when we're looking at this building, is the curtain wall versus, I don't even know what, punch window, which one has a bigger embodied carbon footprint? Do you even know that? So that's a great place to start. That whole building life cycle analysis is fantastic, but having benchmarks for that, it's so across the board that it's not necessarily that helpful. So it's really just pick something and try to do better.
Yeah, and that kind of quick, maybe scattered run through I gave of the projects we've looked at across project type, that is something we've gone through with fine tooth comb of taking envelope type, because as Kristen said, yeah, we all have our kind of top 3 envelope constructions we use. So which one has the highest embodied carbon, which one has the lowest, and just starting to understand the components of the building. So then you have these building blocks to add your better building together. And that only takes from understanding how you build and then improving on that. So we're doing both of those as well, that examining what we're doing and trying to improve it, but having another target is also really helpful, because we never met any of the 2030 challenges against that, the Carbon Leadership Forum as benchmark. So it still gives us something to strive to, instead of just saying this building we did was better than our last. Every building we do should be better than our last. So.
Yeah, and it looks like we're out of time. So just so everyone kind of knows, we have our next session on March 11th, and that's going to be talking more about the DDX tools. And then following that, it's the second Thursday of April. I don't know what day that is off the top of my head, but we'll be doing kind of more of a kind of mentor get together. So all these great kind of topics we've been talking about, we'll have a bunch of people together and kind of help you through if you are kind of in the process of starting a sustainable action plan, or just looking into how you can kind of better the process in your office. So we'll have some good local people to sit in on that. And my cat is going crazy. So I will give it over to Ashley to kind of talk about broader AIA Austin COTE topics.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you to our speakers. For those who may not recognize me, my name is Ashley Griswa. I'm incoming chair of the COTE group for AIA Austin for this year, and Kendall Klaus, who's on the call, is our fearless leader. And we just wanted to say thank you all for joining us. I put 2 links in the chat, one to our website where you can follow along with more information about these events and our other events that we have going on. and also to our LinkedIn group. Please follow us, link to us on LinkedIn. We'll continue to post resources and event announcements and other things on there. And so just wanted to let you know that you can stay connected with us if you're not already. And we have our next monthly meeting coming up on March 4th, which will also be advertised on the AIA website. So please stay in touch. We'd love to see you all at our next AIA 2030 events, but also at our other chapter meetings and events. Thanks, everybody.